You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. It's Julian and I. Joining Rod Serling as we go through every episode of the Twilight Zone, and we have to have a quick conversation about what's the I was going to say the trouble with Kevin. We have to talk about Kevin. No, the trouble with Templeton, which is a very, very different story. Julian, what are your initial thoughts on this episode?
I quite like this episode. It is sort of like It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes.
It very much is in that mode. But I quite liked it.
Yeah, I'm the same. I really like this episode. This episode took me by surprise a little bit. I thought it was going to be a you can't go home kind of episode, which they've sort of done, but they've leaned into the nostalgia before in the past. Sort of like the Willoughby episode and the what's the one where the guy walks and ends up in his childhood. Those sorts of episodes, I thought it was going to be something like that. But this is actually a little bit more interesting to me.
Walking
Walking distance, that's one. Sorry, yeah. This one, the actor, Templeton Booth, is an aging actor, and has a young and well, basically sort of like, sexually rambunctious wife who's off with the pool guy, whoever it is she's having affairs with this week, and he's being given another shot at this play, and it's obviously giving him anxiety about his place with the younger generation. And that's what it was interesting to see, this whole thing about this younger generation, and you get this young upstart director who's like, I'm going to do things my way, and this confrontation gives him this anxiety, almost like an anxiety attack. And it sends him back to 1927, and he gets to confront his younger, not his younger self, but his younger sort of partnerships, his wife who's passed on, and his old friend and director. And just that whole thing, we'll talk about that to begin with, but I love this idea of this aging actor sort of getting this anxiety attack, almost like the honesty of it was really interesting for a show like this.
Yeah, I think he's a sort of fascinating character in that way, and I think that, the thing that he says that really sticks with me is when he's talking to his assistant, and he seems utterly trapped. He seems like, we sometimes hear about actors or rich people who it's like, right, you have your daily routine, and yes, you have a limo driver. But I mean, I know a writer who, you would think from outside is at the top of his game, makes lots of money, but assistants take him fucking everywhere. And if he wants to stop for, a drink, you can't do that because you've got to be, you need to sleep. You're going to be another
you've got a schedule. You've got this. Yeah.
Right. And you're being interviewed tonight. You've got to sign 1,000 books, which you're going to do, and you're going to dip your hands in ice afterward because you're in pain and your hands are literally bleeding. And yeah, you get to write whatever you want to write. I mean, there's perks that come with this, but your life is controlled and it's become sort of routine. And Booth Templeton is still a sought-after actor, even though he's aging. He's not struggling with not having a career anymore, which is more common today, perhaps. But he's in a loveless marriage. He doesn't, whatever hotness he felt for this wife is gone, and he's shuttled to and fro, and hopes he remembers his lines. It doesn't really care anymore. I found that sort of being trapped element of it really interesting.
Yeah, I agree, because what they usually show, especially when this young, if they have a younger wife, is sort of what they end up showing at the end of the episode, but they show it for a reason. Is this idea of sort of being dismissed by the young wife, or sort of being taken advantage of? This sort of thing of like, whatever, grandpa, I'm off to sort of sleep with the pool boy kind of thing. But the wife is, like you say, you just see her out the window, and he is so accustomed to it that he's almost like, you know, he almost sort of like as an offhand comment says to the assistant, like, "Oh, who's the visitor we have this week?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, I don't know. It's just some boy. It's just some young gentleman." And he's like, like, you know, she stopped trying to be attentive and sort of faithful, you know, a long time ago. That was one of the first things that went from our marriage, and it's kind of sad. But he's like, "Yeah, you know, I'm paying for this. It's fine. Like, it's, you know, it's what it is." Like you say, it's just the routine of it. Like, he's like, "That's what my life is now," and it's so sad that he is. It's like, well, that's just what my life is. Um, Even to the extent of, I love the fact his assistant is actually there trying to protect him, because his assistant's like, "Look, sir, if you want me to postpone this, I will happily call and say you can't make today. That might be a better thing." It's him that's like, "Nope, nope, you know, show must go on," kind of thing. And so you show that although he's trapped, he's not alone. And so I kind of like the relationship, even that little glimpse you got of him and his assistant, where I was like, okay, this is actually a really interesting relationship and setup. I want to see more of what's going on in this house. Like, it's
No, I'm totally with you. I do think that's sort of fascinating of, you know, the way in which these sort of assistants love their boss, although their job is to cater to and serve their boss, but also to restrain their boss and keep their boss from going too crazy and, you know, having these problems. I love what you said about not falling into the traditional Hollywood trap of sort of lamenting the wife being with the boy and the jealousy, and, you know, and even just seeing it as so sad that, you know, I'm older and she's not interested in me anymore. um you know, the reality is not all relationships are like that, and there are plenty of relationships where, you know, I mean, in the average relationship, probably, you know, somebody, if not both, cheats at some time, and it usually doesn't. That's usually not what ends a relationship.
yeah,
You know, it's other stuff. Not that that can't be a factor, but it's usually the dismissive, mean way that it's done that matters more.
yeah.
You know,
Well, the
and
cheating,
some
the
people are
cheating is
poly and open, and
that's it. Well, in many cases, that cheating is almost this is a symptom of something else. Then it's the something else that usually results in the final breakup. But yeah, no, it's interesting. I like that, but it's almost like you see this like you say, Booth Templeton is more character than I'm experiencing with the Twilight Zone. Often they're sort of like, you know, quite sort of not two dimensional, but like, you know, or so not one dimensional, but there's not a great deal to them. They're there to serve a purpose. He has so much more. Like when he turns up at the stage and there's the guy who's funding the play and he can't remember he keeps forgetting his name, and you can see these things like he's already feeling depressed and a little trapped on other things, and then he can't remember this guy's name, and he sees this sort of like commanding director, and it just keeps chipping away, and then he's confronted by this young guy, and this facade that he's been putting up of being like, "No, it's fine, you know, the show must go on, of course I shall go and do this thing," like just breaks, just crumbles. And that moment when the director sort of saying, like, you know, he asks you a question, what's your answer, I ask you a question, and he's so sort of direct. Like, I was almost like, I've never, you know, I've been watching for like 4 or 5 minutes, and this is maybe 10 minutes in, and I was like, oh, fuck you, leave him alone. Like, you know, it was quite, it
you're
was
like
almost,
screaming at the screen.
yeah, I was like, yeah, but no, I felt for him the moment he sort of like he dashes out of the theater. I was like, no, that confrontation is like something like this was bound to happen. Like, this was coming, and it just so happens at that moment this is what's called this sequence of events, and I thought it was really effective.
No, I agree with that. And, you know, I didn't feel quite as much rage. I mean, the director's a bit of a dick,
Yeah.
you know, but I didn't feel quite as much rage, you know, as you did. Um, yeah, but, you know, I do like where it goes from there with him back in 1927, and he encounters, you know, a speakeasy, you know, liquor's illegal,
Mm.
and he encounters his great, I think his wife,
Mm-hmm.
um, his who died, and,
Mm.
you know, it's sort of like he's held the torch for, and the director of the play that he's in, who's his friend, and you find out that conversation sort of goes bad. You know,
Mm.
they're very superficial. She's very superficial, especially. Doesn't seem really that interested in him as a person. Wants to have fun. Um, And you sort of wonder, like, has he gotten old? Was he not as attentive to her when they were together because he was young and, thought he had his whole life ahead of him, and now he's old and wishes he had these conversations and been more real intimate with her? And was she always this way and he just doesn't remember her? He's nostalgia has been, well, that's usually presented in Twilight Zone, like in Willoughby and stuff like this, is this wonderful sort of thing that you can't go back to, and that's okay. Here it's questioned.
Yeah, when this scene starts, or when the way it plays out, I agree completely. It was that sort of thing of like, is he just gone through? Is it the last part of his life been through rose-tinted glasses? Like he looks back on this with fondness and all this, this reverence of to this past time of like, oh my God, she's amazing. She's this beautiful woman, and she was my best friend. And all sorts of, and then you meet her, and she's like, no, she's a flapper, and she's dancing, and she wants to eat this steak and drink this beer and all this other stuff. And his friend's sort of like a bit of a fop and sort of like wants to do the same. It's all about having fun and this other stuff. And you just sort of go, was he like this, or is he just misremembering and now he's seeing the truth? Or like you say, or has he got old? And that moment when he's like, I just want to spend time with you. And again, I don't know why, but I did feel like there was something more to this episode, because he's like, look, can we go somewhere? I just want to spend time with you. And it's two people at two very different parts of their lives, because he's like, I haven't seen you for how long? He doesn't, it doesn't say how long she's been dead, but he's remarried this woman. And so it's clearly at least several years.
I think she died like within 5 years of that flashback.
Yeah, so he's not okay. So it's been
25 years, 27 years.
So he's had this period. He's like, I want to spend time with you. Like I miss you. Like and this other stuff. And so there's that moment which is heartbreaking, because he's like, he thinks he's going to get this thing that he's thinking about. He's lost, and she's like, no, like I'm here to have fun. Like I want to be around people. And she does. She gets a bit like in his face, and eventually she says like. She gets up and dances to avoid talking to him, and then she's like, and then she actually says, "No one wants you here. I don't want you here. If you're like this, no one wants you here." And it's really like heartbreaking to see it on his face when it's like it's a real kick in the gut. And you're just like, bloody hell! Like,
I felt that too. That's the point where I really felt.
Yeah, I was like, wow, the Twilight Zone's kicking me around the floor a little bit now. I was not expecting that, because again, like I say. The Long Walk and Willoughby have said this thing of like going back and confronting it, but having some sort of resolution, or being shown this idyllic place that you can go to. And this one's like, no, not doing that. And so, at that moment, I was like, wow, okay, where does he go from here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're both men of a certain age. I'm a little older than you. And the idea of any young person being like, yeah, you're lame, I don't want you here. It's like, thank God I never had kids, right? Because, they're going to say that at some point. This is why I make them robots. But, I mean, that's crushing, but also his great love. And I can't help but think, as you describe this, like, because ultimately he takes a script with him and sees that they were reading from script, which clearly there had to be some improv involved, but they do have a script, which I think is very meta and very clever. So it is ultimately a supernatural explanation. So I just have to joke that this is exactly what's going to happen if we get to heaven. People are going to get to heaven and be like, I have matured so much, and we'll meet like that brother who died when, in the war when we were kids, and just be like, right, we have nothing in common anymore. Yeah. I don't even know that I like you. And you hate me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, let's go our separate ways. Thank you very much. Well, there's more than that. Not only because he picked up the script, obviously, that he thinks is the play he was due to rehearse on. But more than that, there's a shot. He storms out. He rushes out. And it pans across the crowd, and it sort of lingers on his wife and his friend, and they've gone dead silent. Like the band has stopped, there's no dancing. The people at the bar are all watching him as he leaves, and the lights start to fade, and it ends on his. And I was like, that's incredibly creepy. but the expression on his wife's face of sadness, of sort of like almost like regret, or like, you know, and I'm like, it's that weirdness, like and like this is one of the first episodes. I'm like, what has happened? Like I haven't guessed this twist. Like, what is going on? And I love that where I'm like, I've no idea what's going on, and then he starts to read the script, and you're like, oh, they were all players in this thing that he needs. And again, that we've talked about this with the previous episodes of live your life, this idea of go on and live your life. And they were playing him to be like, don't get trapped in nostalgia. You've still got things to give. Be yourself. And I was like, oh, that's clever. Like that was the first time I was like, oh, I like that. Very meta, but I really liked it.
Well, I love that moment that you point out. I'm glad you did. It is very Vanilla Sky or Open Your Eyes. That sort of creepiness of, oh wow, this time with music and it's very effective. And I love what you said about the look on her face and this feeling of dislocation that we feel as a viewer. I do find though, I have this thing with fiction in general where I think, why do people not just fucking talk to each other? Like, it's always so weird to me. I go through whole movies where it's like, does nobody ever say I love you? Does nobody ever just level with somebody and say like, we've got a problem? Why, I mean, it seems very 1960 that the way you would get somebody to go on and live their life is to stage this performance. Like today it would be like, look, I love you, and whatever the hell you're in, whether this is heaven or whatever, I'm here and we're going to see each other or not. But, look, buddy, look, buddy, you got to live your life, see?
That would have been fantastic. That would have been very 1927. I get what you're saying. You're right, because I think that would have been the modern interpretation. But I like the fact that they're clearly trying to sort of almost trickle the message to him in a way he would understand. And obviously, like you say, it's got to have a twist, and it's a play, and it's obviously all about sort of like actors and stuff like that. And so, but I like that as this meta narrative of like, oh, he has to see the performance for what it is. And in recognizing that, like, I don't quite understand how him recognizing that makes him step forwards 100%. But I do like this idea where it sort of reassures him of like, I was given this glimpse of the past, but it could have been or whatever. Like, but I recognize now that this is where I'm supposed to be. And I actually, like you said, I have matured and I've done these things, and I need to keep moving forwards. And it gives him a weird confidence, because then I like the way he confronts both the younger director and the owner or the producer, and sort of like lays them out and carries on. And I was like, yeah, I like the ending of this. Like it's well done. I don't know, what were your thoughts on that final section?
I do. I agree with you. I like it too. And much as I like that he doesn't pine for his wife who's cheating on him, I like that he doesn't punch the director or, really he talks back a little and asserts, some dominance, and the director respects him for it. But he doesn't tell the director off. There's a sort of professionalism there. He doesn't get revenge, and just, really dominate the guy. He just decides, this is part of what you put up with in a creative enterprise. It is a compromise. You do have to deal with people. And I love the anti-nostalgia sort of message of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's really anti-nostalgia. I mean, you and I have had these conversations in regard to other movies and privately that, it's great to know that you had a great time of your life. I can look back with nostalgia on relationships and different times in my life and think they weren't as great as I remember, and I was foolhardy, but I was in love or I was young, and there were things that were great. My options seemed in front of me. On the other hand, I am here now, and whatever those circumstances, in some ways better, in other ways worse, find the good and engage. Find something to be engaged with. It may be a late stage comeback, or it may be plays that are not as meaningful to you, but they'll be meaningful to somebody. And, you can still do something of meaning and find meaning in your life. And you and I often talk about that when we see these characters sort of, struggling with some sort of change in their life.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, totally, 100%. I think the ending it conveys all this idea, like you say, almost like anti-nostalgia of like, no, look forwards. I also love that you say that he comes back and he's completely professional, but like you say, there's no bitterness or like, he's not going to be nebbish or like petty. It's just sort of like, no, I know who I am. I'm confident. Yes, I'm going to be at rehearsals, but I won't be shouted at. And I don't like, the producer to be on set whilst we're doing rehearsals. That's just how I work. Take it or leave it. And then he goes off, and I like the fact he just goes off and then greets the rest of the cast. Like, it ends with him going off and greeting the rest of the cast. And I think that's really cool. However, in my head canon, like after that rehearsal, like he goes home and gets his wife and's like, yeah, we're done. Thank you very much, but it's clear that this is not working between us. I'm going to move my assistant in and we're going to live together very happily. And I'm sorry, but this is over. That's the story in my head of how he lives the rest of his life.
I did wonder about that. I think it's more interesting if he doesn't divorce the wife and doesn't do that, and it's just like, yeah, this is part of my life now, and she's nice to look at, but she does her own thing, and there's no love there. Maybe he divorces her. I did wonder when he goes over to the staff. I quite like him, sort of, us being a professional, as you said. But I did find myself sort of, post white privilege, sort of thinking, right, you're late and then you ran out and now you've come back ready to work. Gee, thank you, thank you. It's all about you because you're the protagonist, right? But imagine being one of those other people. Like, where the fuck is this guy?
Well, I'd have you don't hear what you're saying to people, but I would assume that part of it would be like, I'm so sorry, I had a moment, and I know how, because they're all actors. I'm pretty sure they've all had a moment. So no, yeah, but I did think about that. Yeah.
Actors?
They're all consummate professionals, is what I hear. Anyway, any final thoughts on Trouble with Templeton?
I like that. I think you like it more than I do, but I like it quite a bit, and I think this is an underrated episode.
I agree. I think this is not one I'd ever heard of before, but I really enjoyed this episode. I think it'd be. Yeah, underrated is a good answer. I think it's definitely sort of sits up there for me. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us as we carry on our trek. And I hope you'll join us on the next episode.